You couldn't be an investigative journalist at the time of Jesus. You couldn't be doing what Candace Owens is doing in the time of Jesus, or even a long period after Jesus, because this process of demystifying the power establishment and its myth has taken a long time to fully manifest itself. Okay, it's been a while since we've done a Things Hidden, but we're back and we're ready to have another conversation where we explore anthropology and current events. And I'm joined by a writer and editor at aneighborschoice.com, Surit Dasgupta. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine, David. What about you?
I'm doing great too. So, I wanted to have you on to have a conversation with a like-minded person in the world of anthropology and news watching. And one of the things that I think needs to have a Christian analysis is the role of investigative journalism in society, the role of the adversarial journalist, the one who's willing to, uh, in some ways, you could say, play devil's advocate or to question the official storyline, and whatever that is, whether it's a um, crisis or it's a murder, and people are hearing from the authorities that this is the culprit. We hear time and time again all these different plots that people think are rock solid, but then turn out to be it was somebody else who was a killer. And these are popular shows on Netflix. These are popular shows on um, different streaming and television programs. But yet, at the heart of it, I think, is this um, uniquely Christian perspective. And that is that we take for granted where the investigative role of journalism came from. And you and I know, as folks who've been studying Rene Girard and mimetic theory, that we didn't always have investigative journalism. We didn't always have media that took on the powerful, the establishment. We take that for granted now, even though much of the media doesn't do that. We still take it for granted that that is some noble calling of the journalist or the media figure. But in fact, it's a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah, that's true. And like you mentioned, it's not just that it's a Christian. It's a particular kind of Christian revelation, which is the Girardian aspect, and the way this all started. Getting deep into the truth of the matter, investigating what really is the source of the chaos. It came from when humanity left behind the scapegoat mechanism,
Right.
like in civilizations prior to the ascension of Christianity. The scapegoat mechanism, which is putting all of the blame on one person and or one party in order to find a solution. That was the prevailing method by by how societies operated. So once that once that method got deconstructed by the gospel narrative, by particularly the passion narrative, uh, human beings were forced to find out what really is the truth instead of placing the blame on a single person or a single collective. And that, I think, is the root of investigative journalism, which is held as sacred nowadays in this modern age.
Yeah, this this ability to move away from myth is important because journalism comes from media, and the media comes from mythology and scribes, the people who would oral tradition, they would pass down the oral story. And then when the written word becomes more common for cultures to adopt, they start to write down, well, first it's pictorial, but then it's, letters and words and alphabet. Eventually, you start to have all of these different stories preserved on paper, what we call scribes. And these scribe casts are the ones who are really the most important feature of a hierarchy, which is the careful transmission of the rituals, the taboos, the prohibitions, the rites of passages, the liturgies. All of these structures are preserved very carefully by the scribe or priestly caste that continues the ritual. They bow the right way, they signal the right, incantation, whatever it is around the world. This is a universal phenomenon that Rene Girard rightly points out is rooted in this kind of spontaneous desire to alleviate tensions and pressure socially building and bubbling up in a society so strongly that it pits people together, pits people who are normally friendly together against each other. Um, and and the scapegoat mechanism is this unconscious relieving of the tension by blaming a common victim or a common target that looks like they stand out, that look like they're the one who is guilty of creating the bad blood or the bad juju or whatever people call it today in the room. Bad vibes is what people say today. Um, that person is then the target of releasing all of the violence onto uh, the uh, the guilty party, and the catharsis, the relief of that tension is then put in place. But like you said, the gospel breaks that open. It's this mechanistic unveiling. It unveils not just mechanistic, it's poetry, it's beauty, but I'm just explaining the kind of social dynamics here. And so I use the word mechanism, but it's unveiling how that process happens, how we all get swept up and stupefied by mimetic groupthink, and then how we relieve that kind of frenzy that we get caught up in. And of course, the Gospels to portray this during the Passion of Christ, when Christ is being the scapegoat, he's being the sacrificial lamb led to the slaughter, in the Passover uh, imagery around his arrest and his persecution, his trials, his brutalization. There's a passage where Peter denies Jesus as Jesus predicts. And Peter, representing all of us, can't handle the pressure of wanting to fit in with the crowd when the frenzy and the passions of the crowd are riled up. And Rene Girard points out that it's the final betrayal of Christ happens with Peter when he's around the fire, and they're all trying to warm themselves up. And that fire, he says, is a picture. Not only is it a real fire, but it's also a picture of the fire of an impassioned crowd, the righteous fervor and excitation that takes place. Dr. Yu would point out on a vibrational level, this is going on when you have a crowd phenomenon. The resonance of the minds of the crowd are at play here. And they come around and they are determined that this Jesus needs to get his comeuppance. They don't even know why, but they're determined he's got to get it. And the young maiden confronts Peter and he says, no, 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 I don't know him. And he's trying to get himself warm in the fire. So he's being swept up by the fiery passions around him, as the young maiden is as well. That contagious fire is starting to get cold as history unveils the scapegoat mechanism through the spreading of the gospel through the ages. And so you are seeing skepticism. You're seeing people position themselves psychologically further away from the fire. They don't need the fiery hot flames of passion to draw them into conformity as much. They have a little bit more distance from the fire, and therefore cold reason starts to kick in, and therefore there's this desire to speak against injustices. Now, of course, we had bits and pieces of this going, uh, of course, throughout history prior to Christ, but never did it become such an institution as to become media as we have had in recent history. But in the past, sir, the prophets were kind of like the investigative journalists of their time, right? They would come along and they had a little bit of distance from the cool kids, so to speak, the conformists. They were a little bit built different, a little bit strange, a little bit off kilter in some way. And that gave them the ability to see the injustices going on in ancient Hebrew society and be able to write about it. And that writing about it involves condemnation, particularly of abuse of oppressed people, people who would be most targeted for sacrificial violence or scapegoating or blame, people who can't fight back. Most of the prophets that we see in the Old Testament are in a position where they can rightly call out injustice when it's happening against, especially the weak and the vulnerable.
Yes, and this search for justice and aligning themselves with the vulnerable or with the innocent, like what you said about the passion narratives, like the one the one way that the passion narrative deconstructs the sacrificial method or the scapegoat mechanism is by depicting Jesus as completely innocent. When when all of the crowd went against Jesus, and they assumed that by eliminating Jesus, all of the chaos of the society at that time that would be solved. But because the apostles who were writing down the story of Jesus, because they showed him as completely innocent, that did not that unifying effect that the scapegoat mechanism has on a society, that did not come into effect. And ever since then, that has become more and more saturated into the larger culture of the world, where to nowadays we are automatically siding with the innocent, with whom we perceive as being unjustly persecuted or vulnerable. We automatically assume that person needs to be defended by the aggressors. And so the you mentioned the crowd is often at odds with investigative journalism, right? It is often at odds with search for truth. And that is another thing which the gospels expertly deconstruct, is that the crowd is emblematic of irrationality, emotionalism.
Yeah.
The crowd is never it's always fiery, it's always caught up in the emotions, and it's never in the search for truth. It's always in the search of satisfying an emotional need. And investigative journalism, which is the search for truth, is is completely opposite to that.
Yeah, it's the place of the prophet, it's the place of the outsider, it's the
Yeah.
place of the truth teller. And again, something that Jordan Peterson has talked about in the past, where, and others, of course, but I just name drop him because he's someone that has really brought this idea back into the mainstream as much as it can be, which is this idea that Christianity is particularly interested in the truth as its own power. Telling the truth is its own end into itself. It's not a means, it's not a technique, it's not a tactic. It is the a higher principle that girds humanity forward. And I think that's important because truth stands in opposition to myth, which is about justifying power, right? Myth justifies and conceals the violence and the sins of the powerful so that the society can maintain its unifying delusions of superiority over its common enemies or its threats that need to be put down and stomped on. I was just watching a video. It's a funny kind of illustration, but it makes the point in a way that's unique, I think, is that remember Nickelback was being viciously hated upon for so long. And
Yeah.
they had a famous song that came out around September 11th, 2001. Um, this is how you remind me of how I really am, I think is the song. And that's probably poignant that I had to look at the lyrics further, but humanity does not want to be reminded of who they really are, do we? We don't want to be realizing how sheepish we truly are, and even in our own individualistic, um, you know, uh, special tattoos or whatever it is that we adorn ourselves with to try to stand out more and more, we don't realize how much that is still consciously or unconsciously borrowed from others around us. And so, to the extent that we don't recognize our sheep nature, we are more enthralled in sheep-like desires being, caught up into them left and right. But Nickelback was like this huge sensation around that time. And then it becomes for many, many years, and I saw it too, and maybe I even participated. I don't remember, but it wasn't my particular kind of music. But it became such a mark of high society and social status to say you hate Nickelback music, and it became this pow on. The whole world online was caught up in, oh, you have to say that you hate Nickelback to show that you're, sophisticated in your taste, even though people didn't even know what they were. They just had to signal that. And, and so therefore they were derided and hated. And I thought about it, and Nickelback lyrics tend to deal with, the working class, the folks that are considered to be, you're not supposed to, like people that would shop at Walmart. Oh, you have to denigrate those people and mock them. That's probably one of the reasons why Nickelback became so um, uh, fun for folks to hate and punch down on because it was a safe place. They weren't representing a minority group, which would be obviously tabooed to have television shows going after on a daily, nightly basis. So they could hit it hard because they were, songs and lyrics about working class, poor, or lower middle income lifestyles and issues that people were dealing with. And so it became a way of signaling that you're not one of those. And I think you're familiar with that, right? With that dynamic at play in
Yeah.
different tastes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's There's a lot of particularly in the entertainment industry. There's this movement called avant-garde, and this is like uh, it's completely a mimetic movement. If you read Barjayev, you'll know why. Because
Who's
it's like
Nicholas? For folks who are not familiar, just tell people who that.
that's a existential philosopher from the 20th century, early 20th century, who critiqued various creative movements around that time. So one of the things he wrote about is this avant-garde movement. Right now, nowadays, you would see it in like punk rock or these other much more supposedly much more trendier genres of music. And one of the thing, if you are a fan of that movement, one of the thing is expected of you is to frown down upon something that is relatable, right? You're not supposed to be relatable to everyday folk. You're supposed to be like this high and mighty deity kind of figure, which is beyond the reach of the person, of the average person. So Nickelback was a victim of that trend, because, like you mentioned, their lyrics were had much to do with the working class people, and that was one of their goals, is to be relatable to the common listeners. But as the as the years went by, it became uncool to be relate. It became uncool to be normal, and it became much more cooler to be different for different sake, as Bajayev would call it,
Yeah.
because that is meaninglessness. Basically, it's like creating something new just for the sake of creating something new, but not really intending anything by your creation. And that unfortunately became the prevailing uh, the prevailing movement in the entertainment industry. So yeah, it's like it's highly mimetic is what it is.
It's highly trendy and uh, trying to be cool, and yet
Yeah,
because being cool is about staying away from the fire of the wrath of the crowd. Really, that's hot over there. Um,
yeah, yeah,
it literally is hot. Creates inflammation, pain, suffering, and all that. But um, when you think about the what happened with Nickelback is that just like anything in a post crucifixion world, especially one societies uh, like our own today, this globalist society, this Western oriented society that has long had Christianity soaking in it for some time. Of course, the more you're persecuted, eventually it boomerangs back, right? And now people have noted that Nickelback has made a resurgence in popularity. Maybe some of it's ironic, whatever, but because they were so vilified and because they were so in people's faces, they kind of stood and survived the era in which many other, bands and magazines that derided them and TV shows are now long gone and nobody remembers them. The aura of being a scapegoat, of course, creates social currency in today's world, even though people are still trying to find ways to gang up and cancel and ostracize people. The more people are ostracized, the more it gives them aura and social credibility and status, just like Nickelback. So it's just a kind of a fun pop culture reference, whether you like it or not. The music, it doesn't matter. It's about the bizarre phenomena of the crowd trying to find its unity off of punching on some common enemy. So, having said that, I think we've laid the table now to get into Candace Owens and what the meaning of Candace Owens is right now in our current cultural zeitgeist. She's been really doggedly concerned about finding out, if there's more to the story about the assassination of Charlie Kirk from Turning
yeah,
Point USA. And we've talked a little bit about it on this show a few months ago, but I wanted to pick up on this. I didn't talk really about Candace Owens as much, but she is someone that is relentlessly pursuing any lead she can find to kind of tie together what she believes to be a clear uh, case of things not adding up, according to the official FBI story and the television story that most people have been told that it was just this one guy, and he was motivated by um, resentment towards criticism of the trans community because he himself was supposed to be engaged in a relationship with a trans person, or I don't know if it was a furry thing or what, but um, that 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 seemed to be the official clean narrative. And then we got the huge funeral, and then there's this transformation of Turning Point, kind of going in a new direction. They've put his grieving widow as a CEO, which I just don't, I agree with. I think Candace has said that's not a good position for someone who's grieving. I agree with that. That's, CEOs have to answer tough questions. They have to be the person that's responsible for mistakes and things like that. And that's a heck of a position to put someone in who just lost their husband in such a horrific way. But I think Candace has received a lot of attacks. She's got a lot of followers right now too. She's bigger than ever in terms of her audience size, but she's also received tremendous pushback from a lot of influencers and people like Tim Pool and people like uh, uh, what's that lady's name? I can't remember her name. Um,
The one
Beth
with Timpu.
Stuckey or
Yeah,
something. Yeah, Stuckey.
yeah, yeah. Ali Beth Stuckey. Yeah,
Allie Alice, is it Alice or Allie? Allie Beth Stuckey. Okay,
Ali or Alice. I don't.
yeah,
Probably
she's a bit of a
something.
hall
Yeah,
monitor for Evangelical Inc. She
yeah,
comes off
yeah.
and she's always kind of looking really angry at everybody. But she's been really going at Candace, and Tim Pool's been screaming his lungs off every day about Candace, and um, and now Erika Kirk is even starting to take the gloves off and go after Candace, and this is all very tough stuff to talk about when you want to be Christian in the way you give people charity and grace, especially when they're everybody's got all these hot emotions from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which in our context today was an attempted sacrificial assault. It was a scapegoat assault. And it backfired, of course. But see, we take this for granted now that this martyr's energy builds around someone who is murdered because of their beliefs or their positions or their choices, what they stand for. We automatically know there's going to be a martyr's energy, and we don't even understand the cultural inheritance from which we gather this. And it's so important to understand this because you don't know where you're going and who you are and what your identity is if you don't know what shapes your thoughts and feelings and passions. And that's Christianity, that's the cross.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And another thing, one thing struck out to me is, according to my observation of this entire Candace Owens, Erika Kirk, and Turning Point thing, is that a lot of people attack Candace Owens for going against the official narrative, that like the narrative presented by the so-called experts. And this is just a microcosm of what we had seen in during the lockdown days, right, where people were being attacked for not following the directives of the expert class. But like you said, if this wasn't the post crucifixion society that we're in right now, then that would have worked. But because our culture and at large is haunted by a man who did not belong to any expert, right? Expert class, like we're speaking about Jesus. Jesus did not belong to any priesthood. He did not belong to any political class, but he was a common man, an everyday man. And he Because we follow the religion of the everyman, that is Christ, we have a tendency to side with those who have the odds stacked against them. uh, so when we see somebody like Candace Owens, who is doing everything that she can within her limited resources to seek justice for a friend who was killed, then we appreciate the dedication and the loyalty far more than we see in the official narrative, right?
Well,
Because
let's
the people,
unpack that. There's because it's complicated because you have layers of this
yeah,
scapegoating dynamic collapsing on top of one another. Okay, so you have President Trump, who was a target of an assassination attempt. He gets this martyr's energy. He's a target for 20, 30, I don't know how many criminal indictments he was facing, 60, 100, 5,000. He gets his mugshot. He gains more and more power the more these pylons happen, so that someone like FBI Director Kash Patel gets to cash in on some of that martyr's energy that's still hanging around some of the fervent, passionate support for Trump because they feel like with Russiagate and all the other things, he's the underdog's president, right? Then you
yeah,
have, and then of course there's problems with that because just because you're an underdog or a scapegoat doesn't mean that everything that you do is of God. Okay, that's the problem with these conversations is that people don't know how to have actual intelligent conversations when it comes to talking about Christ archetypes
Yeah,
or things. They say, oh, you're saying it's Jesus? Oh, it's all good. No, no, no. We're talking about whether someone is being a target and blamed unfairly by the rest of the establishment. And Trump has been a victim of that, but he's also dished it out as well. So it's no one's, you know, this is not a black or white thing. Then you
yeah,
go to the issue of Turning Point, where Charlie Kirk was a victim of losing his life, and his kids are a victim, and his wife and his friends and his parents, victims of someone saying it is better that that man die than my ideologies perish. This is a paraphrase of Caiaphas and his revelatory signature line for why he felt the need to create a conspiracy to murder Jesus. So he thought that this would stop Jesus and avoid their nation being destroyed by Rome, who would be upset by the electricity of the crowd that Jesus was you know uh, bringing to bear. And so there's martyr's energy there, right? Because you have Charlie is this sacrificial scapegoat for one ideology, but then that ideology feels that they are righteous in their attack against Charlie because they feel like they as a collective group of people being trans or furries are marginal and therefore made fun of and picked on and discriminated against, and they feel left out in the cold by what they want to be heralded as normal, completely standard behavior to be what they feel they are in their identity. Again, swept up in their own crowd, but they're trying to build this martyr's energy to then justify violence against Charlie. Charlie gets martyr's energy because he is the target of that, and people rally in support of him. And then Turning Point USA gets that martyr's energy in some way because they're the organization that was the found something that this person built. I mean, imagine, people anybody who's, got a cause with power and charisma in their heart for something, whether they are right or wrong, it's going to create in a post crucifixion world a aura to it, especially if they're murdered, doing what they love, fighting for their ideology, right? So saying all of that, then you get to Candace Owens, who is from perspective of people who support her, she has this martyr's energy because she's being vilified left and right by tons and tons of influencers. And she's also a victim because she was a close friend of Charlie. So she gets some of that, you know, kind of transferring over to her. But then she's also, again, being, she's being marginalized. She's saying, people were treating her like she's Candace 19, like a disease, and uh, big television networks like Fox News and CBS are united in doing denouncements of her, Glenn Beck, everybody. So she's being socially ostracized right now. And so she gains more martyr's energy in that way too. So how does that make, what does that, how do you make of that to see all those different layers just in that story right there? And there's many more, but that's just kind of the big picture.
yeah, yeah. And in other words, we are telling people why they really voted for Trump, right? Because sure, Trump had all of these anti-war rhetoric in his campaign or anti-establishment rhetoric in his campaigns. But at the same time, there's also an unconscious tendency that we have, like you described, that we tend to side in this post-crucifixion age, in this day and age where the story of the crucifixion, Christ's crucifixion in particular, is embedded in our subconscious collective mind, and because of that, we tend to side with the underdog, and a lot of people know that, and a lot of people know, like including the people at Turning Point USA, like on when Erika Kirk publicly forgave her husband's killer, it was done in a very public forum, right?
Yeah.
And that was like, I'm not saying that she had any ulterior motives about that or anything, but it's just something that unconsciously comes out. It's just something like people say that, if people think that if I do this, then there will be like there will be a lot of people who applaud this forgiveness or whatever. So like, not saying that she had any, again, not saying that she had any ulterior motives or anything, but in this day and age, if you want to become powerful, you have to do things like that. You can't be somebody who demands bloodshed and not be criticized for it in this age that we're in right now.
Well, you can do
So
bloodshed, but you always have to try to position yourself that makes you look
yeah.
like you were the aggrieved victim first of bloodshed.
Well, I'm talking about bloodshed in the old world sense of the word, right? Like in the old world, you really didn't need any justification to commit
Okay.
bloodshed. If you had the might and manpower and resources available, you just went ahead and did it. That's why there were kingdoms in the old world. There weren't any nation states, there were kingdoms. And the kingdoms were able to exist because the king decided to go and annex territories according to what he believed. So yeah, I mean, nowadays you can't, nobody, like, in order to invade a country, a country has to say that, has to justify it, that they are the victims of some kind of, like, see for instance Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
Russia has to position itself as somebody that has been aggressed upon, and that's why they did it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have never got away.
And Trump's desire to go after his opponents is because he's been aggressed upon, right? That he was
Yeah,
first.
yeah,
That's
exactly.
what
Yeah,
it takes that gives him the currency to be able to do that. Uh, and there is a little bit of a pass that the government, that the public gives Trump because of that. It's like, well, if they did that to him, I guess we're going to give him a little leeway to do that to back at them. But always there's this. You said that there's this. It's the forgiveness line has, especially for people who position themselves as deeply committed Christians. The culture, even though it hates Christianity in its true sense, it's still so haunted by it, and it still has this begrudging admiration for people who take Christianity serious. That there is this expectation that Christian people, particularly the evangelical Christian group that the Kirks were identified with, must lead the way with forgiveness of their enemies, right? That's an expectation that's placed upon people in Christian identity. And whenever there's a tragedy, remember when there was the school shooting of the Amish, and the Amish or Mennonite community, and they came out immediately and said, "We forgive them," right? And you've seen this
yeah,
happen recently, where there's this growing right wing resentment movement amongst the younger folks and online folks that are saying, no, that is cucking. That is, you know,
yeah,
loser energy. We're not going to do no more forgiveness. We don't forgive. And you see folks like Jack Posobiec and other people touting that kind of line. We don't forgive until there's been restitution or repentance has to be there. But that's not the Christian. That's not actually what Jesus does. You know,
yeah,
you forgive
yeah,
70 times seven. It doesn't mean you forgive 70 times seven as long as there's a statement of confession and repentance each step of those 70 times seven. That's not what he says. Although that is a healthy dynamic, confession and repentance of slights and insults is a healthy mimetic way to discharge bad blood between two rivals, right? Um, that's a good.
yeah,
That's the way it should function, but it's not required that you have to have justice or confession or repentance on the other party before the other person offers forgiveness. So I just want to unpack some of that cultural expectation of forgiveness and the this growing resentment against it that you see in the right that says no, you don't do forgiveness to people who hurt you. Even Trump said something about that at the funeral for Charlie when he was talking about I don't do that forgiveness stuff, and he trying to make
Well, one of the thing that you may find interesting, David, is that forgiveness and trust is very closely related,
yeah,
right? So when you're forgiving somebody, you are trusting that person. Like when you are, like, let's say you committed something against another person, and when you ask forgiveness from that person, you are trusting that person to have mercy on you.
yeah,
So that presupposes trust. So one of the things that people take for granted is the high trust in societies,
hmm,
right? Like for example, in particularly in Western societies, it has often been said that those societies are some of the most high trust societies on this planet.
yeah,
So what enables that level of trust is I would say that. It's because of the accessibility towards forgiveness, that it's because of that there's a high trust. So when you have, like, when you have a mindset of like, no, we won't have forgiveness until there's restitution, well, that would lead to a very paranoid society.
yeah.
That would lead to a society where you're not sure, where you have to always watch over your back if
Yeah.
somebody is out to get you, because that's not a healthy mindset, and that's what these new right wingers, as you say, that's what they don't get, right?
Well, and it's also common to say, well, the role of the government is not to be in the business of forgiveness and all that. The role of government is justice, and you can make an argument for that in different ways. How you get there, but
Yeah,
that's why that brings us to the point, kind of going back to the Candace Owens story, why there's so much distrust towards the FBI, right? Is it time and time
yeah,
again? I mean, like the Vegas shooting. I mean, so many strange things surrounding that, and we're just memory hold. You never even bring it up, And it's funny how the political, the politicization of which tragedies they bring up over and over again, then which ones they don't, right? Like January 6th, they brought that up and tried to make that. Literally, George W. Bush was saying this is the new 9/11 on the anniversary of 9/11 after that happened. And then, they've got um, Vegas shooting. Where do you hear about that? When does George W. Bush and Barack Obama go down to lay a wreath or some kind of flowers or something, or Trump even at the Vegas shooting site, right? It's a local memorial, maybe, but there's nothing. I don't even know if there's a local memorial, I'm assuming, but there's nothing that's being remembered intentionally by the TV party. And so I say all that to say that there's a reason why people are looking at the FBI with such skepticism and saying, wait a second, you're supposed to be this objective, transcendent arbiter of justice, which allows us to have, like you said, the comfort or the space to have forgiveness, right? Because in a tribal society where there is no trust or high trust in justice, you're right. It's very dangerous to say I forgive someone for murdering my family member because you're opening up your tribe for more attacks, right? Because the idea is the tribe, in this case, you have Christian Evangelical Inc. or whatever, this ideology, and then you have Transgender Inc. or whatever, and I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense. I'm just saying they are kind of corporately branded, these things that are being battled here. And they're battling one member of one tribe is allegedly killing this icon of another tribe. And then the widow is saying, I forgive you. This is a radical non violent mimetic gesture to diffuse violence and imitation of violence back at the rival tribe. And that was a good thing that she did that. However,
Yeah.
it does raise other questions when you say, well, we can have that forgiveness because we have a trustworthy, transcendent arbiter of justice called the FBI. And people say, no, we don't, including Kash Patel before he got the job. Right.
Yeah.
And now Kash Patel's in that job, and the same weirdness is going on with those organizations. And it doesn't make sense. And people's truth telling, truth sense making says there's something that doesn't feel right. And that's what Candace basically keeps saying over and over again. Something doesn't smell right about the whole story here. And I'm not getting into the details. I can't keep up with the planes and the serial numbers, and it's Egypt and it's France. And, you know, she is not a professional investigator. Okay. When I watched her start to look at this, I kept thinking, man, I wish I could have got her in touch with my old buddy, Detective John Beza, former
Yeah.
NYPD detective. He's a detective's detective and is an expert witness for misconduct and all kinds of, high level, high stakes situations in courts. And he was the former bodyguard for Ron Paul as well. And a great, great guy. And it would have been great to have someone like him kind of guide her and like kind of going through. He's much more, like he's trained in that world. He knows how to be professional and so there is this great fear and anger amongst people when Candace has this crowd following her and she's looking to find the truth. She is, in that sense, imitating the gospel technology of unveiling the sausage making of the transcendent establishment. In this case, the television, the media, mainstream media, Turning Point, and and the FBI and all the other agencies. She's saying, I don't trust the official emperor's narrative here. That's a very bold thing to do because she risks her life, her reputation, being socially ostracized. She risks a lot doing that. And that's how, you couldn't be an investigative journalist at the time of Jesus. You couldn't be doing what Candace Owens is doing in the time of Jesus or even, a long period after Jesus, because this process of demystifying the power establishment and its myth has taken a long time to fully manifest itself. And only recently have we gotten to the point of having these huge levels of skepticism that allow for investigative journalism. And so, this expectation of doggedly pursuing the truth, even if it hurts people's feelings, is a very Christ haunted and Christ inspired idea that Candace is motivated by. And being able to challenge the establishment to the point of ruffling the feathers of the highest, most powerful folks in the biggest empire in the world is a very bold and Christ like gesture. However, it's a double sided coin, right? Because on the other side of the coin, when you are looking for a suspect, it is a very dangerous and accusatory, which in the remember what is the word for the accuser in the New Testament?
Satan.
Yeah. So to be the Satan, here's where that's how Candace looks to her enemies, right? Who are watching and they're saying, wait a second, you're wielding this power called accusation. And this is the accuser. And therefore, you look like an accuser to me. You look like the Satan. You look like the villain here because you are pointing the power of your millions of followers this way, that way. Look at this, car. Look at this company. Look at this guy with the shirt. And that comes with great mimetic fervor and passion for people who don't trust what they saw and they have questions and they don't trust anything. We saw that with QAnon and all these other things that people can spiral into these endless states of fervor and paranoia, which are dangerous in what they lead the human mind and the human society and meshed in such things. So do you see what I'm trying to lay out here is that she is both coming in a Christ-like gesture, but from her enemy's perspective, in terms of the people who are, pushing back in, a popular conversation and debate, they see her from the accuser perspective. And of course, she sees the FBI and Israel, the state of Israel, in the accuser's perspective because she sees them as trying to take his legacy and weld his legacy into this position of being in favor of the war and the war machine and the violence that's taking place overseas with that story. What do you think of that?
Uh, I don't know if they are seeing her as an accuser perspective from the biblical perspective of an accuser. Uh, One thing I would say though, like if you have any person who is doing detective work or investigative work under particularly around something that is as important as Charlie Kirk's assassin, then that's very similar to how the political class and the priesthood felt during Jesus' time. So I would say that maybe perceive her as a threat to the collective, because there's also this what Candace is doing is kind of like an embodiment of our distrust for myth making, because if you read history from times prior to Christ and his incarnated life, you see it's very hard to make the case that things are written down as objectively as they are, which is not the case. I think things are obviously heavily mythologized. They are embellished with a lot of legends and symbolic events and things like that. So nowadays, because of the Christ hauntedness of our collective psyche, as you said, we tend to resist that kind of legendary embellishing and myth making. And we tend that seems to be our natural instinct, and as a result we are distrustful of the FBI or any other government agency, because we see the government and their agencies as modern day myth makers, right? That's why we distrust them so much. A lot of people say that we distrust these institutions because they're not doing a proper job. I would say we distrust these institutions because we are haunted by Christ.
Right. Yes, of course. That's the ability to even see that they're doing an improper job is only a result of the cross, right? Because you wouldn't even look to question. You wouldn't even have people
Yeah,
peeling off and auditing them. You wouldn't have an ombudsman position or a internal watchdog position within some of these agencies, even though they don't really function like they should. You wouldn't even have people questioning or needing to change out the FBI director every few years. You would just have a permanent mob boss, guy that runs
yeah,
the king's court for the FBI's role. And so, um, yeah, the whole thing is we're showing folks how much we're swimming in Christ's fishbowl, right? And you got to understand this, because if you don't understand this, you don't know how these things will work out. When you see it, you can
yeah,
kind of see how it's going to play. Um, Although there's always, little details that are different in each story. But right now, it's like Candace Owens is playing a live version of the show Twin Peaks. It starts off
yeah,
with Twin Peaks starts off this hit show in CBS in the '90s with Who Killed Laura Palmer. Well, Candace Owens' show has turned into Who Killed Charlie Kirk, right? And so each day
yeah,
people tune in to find out who did. Now, people see this as crass. Some people, they say this is your way of making money off of this man's tragedy. This guy has kids, he has family members. You don't want to be, and that's true. You have to be sensitive and not exploit. I mean, We're different from the pagan Romans that would, create entertainment out of the spectacle of someone's loss, right? Someone being fed to the lions had a kid, right? Maybe in the crowd, unfortunately, right? And so we don't want to
yeah,
be. fetishizing or cheapening life as a form of fueling entertainment or whatever. So that's the accusation made against Candace. I do think Candace is sincere though, and I think that that sincerity is being rewarded by more and more interest in terms of an audience than she's had in some time. I would say it looks like in terms of um, the numbers that she's got and the attention she's drawing every time she talks. But she is kind of functioning as like a live, real reality version of Twin Peaks. And, the more she dives into this clue or that clue or this clue, and sometimes they're rabbit trails, it's just like Twin Peaks. You want to find out. But just like Twin Peaks perhaps was a critique on the TV and its desire for closure, right? Just like that, Candace Owens is a critique on the desire for our audiences today to have closure. Okay, we know who killed it. We figured it out. Don't even have to wait to the trial. We know what's going on. He's a weirdo. He's a classic tribal enemy of Charlie's tribe. What a shame. We found out who killed Charlie. Let's move on, right? Well, that's the same thing that Twin Peaks was critiquing when it came out, which is he didn't want to show, who the what actually who actually killed her, Laura Palmer, because he didn't want to have that feeling of closure and catharsis for the audience. He wanted them to wrestle with the guilt and how it spreads. And one of the things that Candace has done along the way is point out other issues related to the culture that we're in which Charlie loses his life. Let's be honest that the wars that we've continued to engage in, the absolute atrocities that our government continues to be a major party, if not the principal party, whether it's in Ukraine or Gaza or other nations, Africa, all these other places that we see, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, all these places in which our government continues to be the main instigator of what really amounts to chaos in most cases. That is something that has its own violent reverberations back into culture, which then cheapens life. When you see Twitter feeds and people in Ukraine being blown up, and it cheapens life, and you see Iraq and you see Libya, you see Afghanistan, and so many generations growing up in that, it cheapens life to the point where someone thinks, oh, I can make a point against somebody. And now we're killing pundits, we're killing commentators on college campuses, violating the sacred safe space that the West had created, that universities could be a place of debate, not primitive violence and its reciprocity. So that's an interesting, layer to consider here, which is that um, these stories are being told with interlacing, intersecting kind of context and stories invading one another, and ultimately, it seems as if Candace has she continues to kind of position herself with the moral high ground. Recently, Erika Kirk said, "Stop." Right, that was her answer to people asking her about Candace Owens and other people's conspiracy theories. And Candace Owens, flipped it around and said, well, I'll stop as long as you tell me what lies I've said specifically. So she's saying, tell me what specifically I've gotten wrong, and where did I, because I want to know the truth. So she's appealing to that transcendent of the truth, not a tribe. And that's what's kind of an interesting dynamic happening here. And I think, just to kind of sidebar, I think that Candace is very right, though, to fight against the myth making going on around Charlie Kirk's death as it pertains to Zionism.
Yeah, yeah. I
Because
mean,
that's
I wish.
that, because, you have all these folks coming out and saying, oh, Charlie's organization, he was a total supporter of Israel, even though he was questioning it, he was trying to go in a different direction. He had said, I'm not supporting him in one of the texts just right before he passes. And that's verified as from him by other people, and he's saying I'm not supporting them anymore. He was questioning the huge slow time it took for October 7th to be stopped by the Israeli authorities when they had that place locked down like nobody else in any other country, and they have the most militarized, secure border you can imagine, and yet they're just hours and hours and hours are going by, and he questioned it over and over again. And he questioned, he called what was going on in Gaza ethnic cleansing, and so he was in a really wrestling spot. He was really upset with the way people were treating him when he would just question them like a normal human American is supposedly allowed to do, until somebody comes in and says, "No, your American rights stop here." And you're like, "Who is that?" And there's like, "Nothing to see here. Move along." And Charlie was going through that. And for them to then, in his death, just paper it over and go over to Barry Weiss's CBS, which is turns out to be like 24/7 advertisement for the state of Israel, just brazenly now, which we always knew she was moving that direction. I remember her being back on Joe Rogan's show back in the day and many years ago. This is like 2018 when she was just coming up and becoming a character we were supposed to care about. And Joe Rogan mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. She says, "Oh no, no, we don't like her." I'm like, "Who's we? What are you talking about? Like who? You acting like you speak for everybody. Who are you saying?
Yeah, as if
Are you
she's a
gatekeeping this
spokesperson.
man?" And now Tulsi is in the different position, but she had to kind of say certain things to get in that position. It seems like. What'd you
Yeah.
say?
No, I was agreeing with you. She was saying, as she was speak Barry Weiss, she was saying as if she was a spokesperson for something, so
For
some
media, for the media.
for media.
I will
Yeah,
speak for the official standard of media. You're not allowed to like Tulsi Gabbard, Joe. She likes Assad. Oh, okay. Maybe if Joe had gotten early in on supporting the Al Qaeda chief, maybe she would have said, "Yes, that's it. That's the one we're looking for, Joe. Thanks." So give us an early lead on that
yeah.
guy, the guy running Al Qaeda at the time that Joe's or whatever group affiliate it was at the time that Joe was talking about how Tulsi was good, and therefore Barry had to come in and say, "No, she likes Assad, so therefore evil. Stop, don't touch." So we don't like people telling us in America that you can't question things. We're sick and tired of being told you're not allowed to question giving that world's greatest medicine that we had to deal with, that experimental drug, to babies and giving it to little kids, giving it to little teenagers, giving it to people, uh, pregnant women. We don't like that, and yet we have a knee jerk, resistance to that, and yet that does feel like what's being said when people say, "Well, I have more questions." And they say, "Well, let the authorities do it." Well, they're not authoritative. What happens when your authorities are not authoritative? Because they've been caught one too many times being obvious since their inception, really. Uh, you know, J. Edgar Hoover and all this being obvious myth makers and cleanup job people. Why do people have to just go along and accept this Mickey Mouse view of the world that they're all a bunch of Boy Scouts, just everything's cut and dry and clear to see? So Candace is speaking for the that underdog spirit of America when she's saying, "No, I want more answers," right? But she also has to watch out about being careful with wielding that skepticism and not letting that become this accusatory mob where random people get caught up in the crosshairs. And I don't think she's trying to do that. I think she's trying to, and from her perspective, again, not a trained investigator, trying to, sort through the data and be as responsible as she can from her understanding.
Well, a person who is denying somebody the catharsis is always going to be dangerous, right? So, like one of the reasons I suspect that Erika Kirk made that comment, when she says, "Stop, stop! These are like stop attacking the people who we think are our family," or something to that to that something to that extent. It says what she's really saying is that stop, like stop disrupting the catharsis of the sacrifice. When the Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and she forgave. uh, and this is something that we should discern is what really is. And I'm not saying she did it out of insincerity, but something that what does genuine forgiveness look like? And that's something that needs discussing. Like, I can understand that this is a sensitive issue and all, but I would point to an historical episode when a gunman shot at Pope John Paul II. When John Paul II met with his would-be assassin, it was not highly publicized event, as if he did not allow the media to invade that space and to record what he and his assassin were actually discussing. But it was conveyed that he had actually forgave his assassin, and what else was discussed during that time that was not made public.
And you're
So
saying
this is something.
kind of like in the what Jesus says about let your prayers be quiet unto God, don't do it a
Yes,
showy way.
yes, and I would
But at the
say
same
that.
time, but it's paradoxical because this world is so cynical and so hostile to Christianity, and the right is moving in a direction that likes to mock forgiveness. That you could also make the argument that it was appropriate for her to use her televised funeral to mimetically model forgiveness.
Well, that's the thing. Did she really do that effectively? Let's say she was sincere. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt. But in this day and age, it's very difficult to do that, because a lot of people did not see that as something sincere. That's the thing. And I mean, I just yesterday I saw a meme of like on the top part of that meme, it shows her a picture of her crying and says, "I forgive Tyler Robinson." But and I mean, it should not be funny, but on the bottom part of that meme, it says, okay, now what did this bleep Candace talking about right now? So, like, one of the comments beneath Candace Owens's videos points out the exact same thing. Like, she forgave her husband's murderer, yet she is annoyed by somebody willing to investigate, or like going to the further extent to investigate who killed her husband. So this is all in the framework of, all in the fish tank, as you say, David, of a Christ haunted world, where it's like it's become so tricky to discern what is genuine or what is not. Like, what really is genuine? What we are seeing, is this a publicity stunt or is this genuine forgiveness? So
And
it's
is
become very
and is
difficult.
Candace truly motivated with people would say, is she truly motivated with good intentions, or did she catch on
Or
a
is she using this to
yeah, to
get
make
back
money
at
off
her
of her
former
dead friend?
enemies?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
is
sounds evil. So you don't, that's the thing is like, you don't know in our day and age, because nothing makes any sense anymore, increasingly so when media narratives are
yeah,
not cut and dry and things are more complicated and you have an untrustworthy, and it's ultimately this untrustworthy vestige of the sacred, which is government, right? This falling apart in terms of cathartically believed and trusted in institution like the FBI, right? It doesn't
yeah,
create a discharge of aha, wow, believable, and they don't communicate in a transparent way. And I know they don't have to always when they're in the middle of an ongoing investigation. I get it, but they could still be more transparent, knowing how, if Cash spent his entire time out of office whipping up distrust of these institutions, then he gets in there and he plays the same game, of like, I don't have to say anything, don't question us. We'll tell you if anything comes up. Well, people have a right to not trust that institution. They have a right to They have more than a right. They have, it's hugely um, uh, uh, discrediting or institution for many, many years, decades, 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 in terms of its credibility over and over again being exposed. And of course, they've labeled Candace a dangerous conspiracy theorist and tried to make her an icon of that. But conspiracy theory, of course, was a word that the CIA and others in the media put into the zeitgeist as this term of low class outcast when it was associated with questioning the JFK assassination, which everybody knows,
Yeah,
was stinks to high heaven of having a lot of collusion with powerful interests. So
yeah,
and of course, Candace is connecting it to a lot of different places. Let's see where the evidence goes and where the truth goes. But it's hard not to root for someone who's trying to go up against this continual pattern in the media of saying, move along, nothing to question. It's as if imagine what she could have done if she had the kind of power and some kind of personal connection to something like the Vegas shooting, right? She could have kept that. In other words, it's like she, for people who don't want to look at the truth of how violent and distrustful everything that they pay their taxes to and support and get goosebumps and live under, and how crazy it can get that they can cover up, Vegas shootings against innocent people just listening to country music by refusing to let the story go. It's almost like people feel like she's not allowing the bodies to be buried, right? For the sacrificial catharsis to be complete.
yeah.
It's if a figure like her had the reach she had now when the Vegas shooting happened and had a friend or a family member or somebody of note to them in that Vegas shooting get killed or harmed, and was able to command the audience of millions in live and real time and keep poking and keep poking and keep commanding the attention of millions of people to help her look for clues and stuff, then it would feel like there's not closure, that the bodies haven't been fully buried. We don't know who's the villain. We don't know because she's keeping the questions going. And that's similar to, again, what's happening right now. You can feel that, you know, from the Erika Kirk and Turning Point supportive perspective, it's case closed. We know who did it. His parents turned him in. Everything's cut and dry. We're just waiting for the procedural ritual of the trial that we have to go through, and then we're going
Well,
to be on with it. And
just to
that,
put,
and by chart, but just by saying, but by Candace saying no, I don't trust this. She's saying it makes them feel like she won't let the body be buried and the myth to rise up in its place, right?
just to put the cherry on the top to what you were just saying, David. I don't know if Candice said this or somebody else associated with her said this, but whoever said it literally questioned whether Charlie Kirk's body was buried or not. Like, did they really bury his body, or is his body still in an uncertain location? And just this just goes to show how much what we're discussing is spot on, because she's asking, assuming that Candace asked that question, she's asking, like, did you really bury the body? And of course, Erika Kirk found that very offensive. And like, wow, how would we question whether her husband is buried or not?
And
So
it's pretty
this
great.
is like,
If Erica's perspective is, the truth, if that's really right, that there is no question to see here, it's pretty disgusting to think about these questions being asked. Nobody would want that. So we have to be sympathetic to it. It's a very complicated thing. But at the same time, it reminds me of the what happened when Jesus was crucified. That the audience, it says, was left the scene of the death of Jesus, the people who had come to be spectators or whatever, They left beating their chest in confusion. They beat their chest not out of guilt, oh man, or not out of satisfaction or relief or whatever, but they were confused. They didn't understand. They were like, I don't get what in the world happened. What was this all about? They're bewildered. And that's how everybody feels
Yeah,
right now about every story, including this one, right? It's bewildering. You
yeah,
can't figure out what the truth is. You can't trust this agent. You can't trust this agency. You can't trust this president. You can't trust the other president. You can't trust the other president. You can't trust the next one. You can't trust this, that. You can't trust the podcaster. They're all on the take. They're all paid off by some, special interest or some Qatar or Israel or Saudi Arabia or God knows who else. Japan's probably got somebody in there. Who knows? Um, is that you, sir? Are you Japan? But,
yeah,
but you've got this post Tower of Babel dynamic really on fire here, where because the mythic enclosed violence that protects the state is distrusted, people don't know what to make sense of the world anymore. The myths don't hold. They can't even be created. They can't even. They're being. There used to be. It take generations to start reassessing a myth, like the start of a war, like Vietnam War and the Gulf of Tonkin, or World War II with FDR. Now, the myth can't even. The concrete of the myth can't even dry, and people are just peppering holes all over like Swiss cheese, the concrete of whatever new mythic kind of. And by myth, okay, folks, just for folks who are new to this anthropological language we're using, myth doesn't mean just the traditional of meaning of like something that's not true. Myth here means this agreed upon, uh, kind of consensus or narrative about who was the villain and who was the innocent one and who deserved to get killed and who deserves to be blamed and so forth and so on. That kind of collective, uh, transcendent, untouchable
yeah,
narrative is what we're
and
talking
it,
about. So it doesn't mean it has to,
yeah,
when we say myth, it doesn't mean everything we're saying is myth is untrue. Okay. Just want to let everybody know that. But it
yeah,
often
and
does correlate with being somewhat untrue.
yeah. Well, I mean, but the in anthropological terms, myth is something that hides something, right?
Yeah.
It's a narrative that hides something, and often, if you look at the myths of the ancient times, they are often hiding the murder, the murder victim, the body. So when we're even reading the myths about Oedipus or any myth like about Zeus or whatever, we have to keep in mind that they're often hiding a violent act over there.
Yeah.
Like for example, in the myths in the creation myths of ancient Egypt, there's a myth about how the world came into being. And if you look at if you, like I don't recall the exact details, but if you look very deeply into the myth, it will tell you that order was created out of killing somebody, right? And that somebody is often depicted as a mythical creature, right?
Right.
So we in this Christ haunted age, we are resistant towards mythologizing things. We
Right.
are resistant towards narratives that are hiding the culprit or the murdered victim. And this is something that we Christians don't really appreciate enough, is how much Christ has shattered the illusions of these myths, so much so that we have a difficult time, believing institutions nowadays, because institutions really are the modern day myth makers. They are often used for propaganda purposes. They're often used for distracting us from major events with nonsensical stories. So they're really mythic institutions. And this doesn't mean that Christ wants us to devolve into chaos, but it means that Christ wants humanity as a species to spiritually and morally mature, to the point where not where to the point that we're not dependent on these violent and sacrificial institutions any longer, to the point that we are trusting in each other, and that we can maturely walk with our neighbor, where we don't feel
Yeah.
the need to scapegoat our neighbor or kill anybody else to step ahead in the world. And that is really the point of all of this, is Christ is destroyed all of these illusions so that we are not dependent on illusions, that we can intelligently create, and
And we can
yeah,
and we can boldly face our participation in the scapegoating crowd that we have engaged as accusers as well.
yeah,
And that's the part that is very deeply Christ haunting. I know we keep using that word, but it's just it is an appropriate term because of what it viscerally evokes, which is the feeling that you can't shake that you're in the presence of Christ's impact in history and you're feeling the fingerprints of history, which in fact feel divine, and the penetrating power that it has for all of us as individuals and society. And our technologies are shaped by them as well. And that includes our media. And if we were to take Candace's perspective, right, and see what she's saying, it is a very disturbing picture to consider, which is that the person, Charlie, realized that he had, you know, made a mistake in his devotion to this Christian Zionism, that he had made all this money and all this support, all this media attention, all this donor money was wrapped around taking on all these issues, free speech, blah, blah, blah. But nobody, if he waffled on Second Amendment, or if he waffled on free speech, or if he changed on, which he did change on different positions, he never got any flack like he did when he started to question the Israel is never wrong narrative. And when he did, again, from Candace's perspective and others, it created a crisis. And actually, this isn't Candace's perspective. It seems to be clearly, objectively the case. There was a crisis going on in the organization about, well, where's the next step? Where's the future of this organization going to go on the Israel matter? Because Charlie's changing his perspective rapidly. He doesn't like the way donors and other forces are putting huge pressure on him to stop allowing folks like, which I was there. I was there in the room for the Turning Point event in Tampa where Tucker Carlson came out and, you know, Charlie's on tape with Megyn Kelly's crew saying, "Go Max" to Tucker right before he goes up on stage, which independently corroborated what Tucker had said prior to that video coming out, which was that Charlie said, "Go Max hard" when it comes to ripping into Bill Ackman and the Zionist case for continually supporting the slaughter of tens of thousands of people in Gaza and elsewhere in the Middle East. And so Tucker goes into that room and he tears into those issues, and he does so with great applause. And yet some people, small group of people were walking out. And I remember turning to someone I know and I said, Turning Point's not going to exist after this. This can't hold together when their foundational kind of uh, tenet that undergirds and basically writes the checks for the free speech and the free market talking points and everything else, and the border is this unquestionable dogma that we must support Israel in its wars and its interests at all times and not question their narratives. This thing is falling apart. Tucker's getting huge applause, but that means that the youth that he is supposed to be reaching and being effective at kind of directing and guiding in the culture is completely sold on the notion that these narratives are not to be trusted anymore. And it's so powerful that Charlie is having to have people like Tucker and Megyn Kelly who were questioning Epstein the whole conference in Tampa and questioning, Tucker was especially questioning the Zionist issue and the war issues and getting great support. I said, wow, this, because it viscerally felt like the donor base and the actual customers of Turning Point were just being torn in half. Like customers are going one way, the donors are going another way. Or it'd be like McDonald's. All the investors are saying, we've got to keep selling seed oil fries, and every customer is leaving McDonald's vacant because they're demanding beef tallow fries. But the donors swear we've got to keep the seed oil fries no matter what. We will not even keep our money in McDonald's. We will divest of McDonald's if they don't keep frying their stuff in vegetable oils. And yet the audience is saying, boo, every time they see a McDonald's, as long as it has seed oils in the fryers, right? And so that's what I saw in that in that meeting hall. And that's when I turned and said, this organization is not going to live. It's not going to survive. And then just a few months later, Charlie gets killed. And which I couldn't even imagine at the time, but just I knew something viscerally has got to, you could feel the tension in the room was so strong and so tight. You cut it, like they say. And so there was a sacrificial crisis going on. There was a tension. And just like in any environment, when there's a high tension, there is a desire to discharge that tension into a scapegoat. Tends to be the founders. Look at Steve Jobs, they get fired. Look at other founders, they get removed. Donald Trump, there's a lot of tension around that contagion, the COVID, and they got him out of town and removed him off the internet and all branding and everything, took him off of all of it. And most of the time, tension within a company can be dealt with by a firing and a banning of the founder. But in this case, this is not just an ordinary company. This is an organization that has huge election impacting results for the greatest empire in the world, which has a lot of obligations overseas intertwined with its military industries. And so he's playing with fire in that case when he's starting to question the foundational tenet that's keeping the lights on. And yet he has to, because the youth are just marching away and they're marching towards folks like Tucker and Nick Fuentes and others who are speaking in various different angles about the criticism of what's happening in Gaza. And that cuts, again, to the very core essence of what Candace is touching upon here, which is that she does not want Charlie's death to be used as an impetus to take his legacy and the cultural currency and mimetic role modeling that he provided to lots of young people and be discharged back into the war machine, which seems to be happening. Now, Turning Point USA's Andrew Clovet, or whatever his name is, Colvet, that, he seems to be sensitive to this by saying there is room in the conservative movement for criticism towards our support for Israel. But there's still, since Charlie's passing, been a concerted effort to double down on Christian Zionist pastors who tend to be very hungry for war with Iran and everybody else over there, and very dehumanizing towards the human beings in the West Bank and Gaza, to say the least. Very unchristian in the way they behave towards them and their outlook and their rhetoric most of the time. And they seem to be doubling down on this direction of Christian Zionism and Zionism at the Turning Point USA organizational level, which is not where Charlie was headed. So there's tension in a group. The founder is removed from the equation. The tension is discharged into this figure, Tyler Robinson, the classic rival of the Christian evangelical brand of our society, right now, at least. And then we're supposed to move on. And Turning Point USA, which has pocketed $100 million and $40 million at the Mar-a-Lago event, according to uh, you know sources are saying a few recently. That's 140 million right there from my count, plus whatever else I'm not aware of since his passing a few months ago. You got 140 million dollars. That's a lot of money, and it's all headed towards this direction of doubling down on Zionism, which ultimately means supporting Israel's war against the rest of the Gazans and the West Bank and Iran and any other countries that are in their way, including maybe Qatar at some point. It sounds like they'll want it seems like they give Qatar a lot of money, and that didn't stop them from going to war against Hamas, who got a lot of money too from Israel. So, looking at this picture, it's super high stakes. We're talking about the soul of a nation, America, at stake. These questions, these issues. We're talking about the role models that young people can look to in a world where it's all nihilistic. Are you telling me that Turning Point USA is going to side decisively with more warmongering voices, like so many speakers and influencer podcasts tend to still push for? They all rebranded, by the way, these talking heads. People like Glenn Beck and everybody say, "Oh yeah, I'm against forever wars, no nation building." But boy, whenever there's a problem in the media and the government says, "Uh-oh, Iran, Iran, Iran," you see that submission, that mimetic submission to the transcendence of the aura, the sacrificial power of the state, consumes all these little no nation building, no forever wars talking people, and they go right back into neocon mode. Let's go get them, right alongside Lindsey Graham. And in fact, in this recent little escapade with Iran, Charlie Kirk was one of the few people apparently who was in the White House. So he had position and access inside the White House at the time that Trump's making these decisions, and was actively pushing very hard against a direct war with Iran. And it seems to be to his credit that Trump chose a path that was not as much a direct war as it could have been. And so that's a good thing. And the idea that that man's legacy is then used to try to revivify a hot full war with Iran and other conflicts overseas would be an absolute, uh, desecration of his legacy and his life's work. And so these are very touchy issues. But the only way we can have any pathway to make sense of it all is to follow the imitation that Jesus provides.
Yep. And uh, to attempt to summarize what you just said, the real issue is not going to be. I mean, there's a concerted effort to treat like whether Tyler Robinson, if he gets sentenced, and that will be the end of the matter. Well, unfortunately, for those who are attacking Candace Owens, that will not be the end of the matter, because the underlying issues, like one of those you mentioned, is Turning Point USA's support for Zionist policies. Those will remain, and as Charlie Kirk was, having these thoughts towards the end of his life, they will have to, the people at Turning Point USA will have to reckon with this dilemma, whether the, what path they want to take America towards. Will they want America to go towards more wars, or do they want to have a reckoning with the foreign policy agenda that they've been pushing? Do they want to take up Charlie Kirk's legacy of grappling with these issues, as Charlie Kirk did privately, as Candace Owens has shown, uh, do they want to imitate that? And that is the real underlying issue,
Right.
is whether they want to uh, truly take Charlie Kirk's legacy forward by grappling with the issue of whether America needs to be involved in more wars on behalf of the state of Israel
Or any state.
and
But yeah, they're the one
or
that
any
keeps
state.
leading the most right now. So
Yeah,
yeah, we don't want to be involved with any kind of immoral war or proxy war, whether it's Venezuela or whatever. But I tell you what, if it doesn't look like Turning Point is going in a more, does it look like it's going in a more pro-war or anti-war rhetorical direction since Charlie's passing?
it certainly looks like they're headed towards pro-war because
And again, they're not going to
they've
do it. They're not going. No one, they know it's stupid to just say a full war. They're going to say proxy war. Regime
yeah,
change coups, CIA stuff, meddling, crippling sanctions that starve lots of kids in Venezuela or whatever. They'll do whatever, but they're not going to call for a hot direct war, even if that's what it spills into. They know that would be ridiculous, but they're going to try
yeah,
to have their cake and eat it too, where they say, "Oh yeah, I'm against no nation building, no forever war." They all say that stupid line. Ever since Ron Paul won that argument and beat the Republican neocons originally, he won the heart and souls of the people over. But then Trump came in and took that and watered it down further, and then has been doing his little proxy wars, trying to have his cake and eat it too. And I understand these things are tough. I know there's a lot of complicated little pieces on the chessboard, but I think Dr. Ron Paul was a much more honest person when he said you can bring them home, just bring them home and stop, curtail the CIA. I know these things are hard to do, but these are things that we should have a cultural appetite and demand that this is what happens if we're going to have a society that functions anymore, because it's going to be torn apart by violence. And there's a lot of hunger for domestic violence and a hunger for more foreign war violence. And the more the foreign war violence continues and continues to provide no catharsis, the more that violence spirals back into our domestic appetite for violence, and it just gets worse and worse. And the chaos is only going to get worse. The ability to know what reality is only going to get worse, especially with AI and the technology that's going to happen there. Uh, the ability to deceive and trick the public and create all kinds of confusion is going to continue. It's going to be a very hard time for people to have a sense of reality if they're not anchored to the truth that Jesus provides, which is that the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And so, therefore, we should, keep that pattern that he has developed in his life and mine as we try to unpack all of these stories. So, I appreciate you coming on, Surit. Thank you.
yeah. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Check out Surit's latest articles on a neighborschoice.com. There'll be some new ones coming out here, and you won't want to miss them. Tell us the titles of the two upcoming articles that we should look forward to.
Yeah, one is about the Church of the Dead versus the Church of Creativity, which will explore what I talked about, the work of Nikolai Berdyaev, and the other is about the massacre of the innocents, which happened after the birth of Christ.
Right.
So, yeah, those two articles should be coming out this month. Yeah.
Well, very good. And that's it for A Neighbor's Choice. Thank you for listening to Things Hidden. You can email me hello at a neighborschoice.com. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.